approvals. So typically these things come forward when you have to go annually in the fall for either budget approvals or presentations to council during the budget process. At least that's been my experience. So we can start there, but certainly if people have other times of the year that they present to their municipal council, this is all just really good information. For today's purpose, though, I have kind of centered it around a typical fall type budget update or presentation to council as they're considering their budget. So that's the context of this, but you can use it for anything. So the first thing that we always want to do when we're presenting to the municipal council is link to their goals and the objectives they have for quality of life. And this is really a great place for libraries to connect in, because libraries absolutely affect the quality of life. So you want to go and find the municipal strategic plan, the municipal goals, if they're listed elsewhere, or pillars sometimes they're called, and make sure that you can link to each one of those key goals, pillars, whatever they're calling them, strategies in your municipality. Find a way to link what you're doing that supports what the municipality is doing. So for example, if your municipality has a strong economic development priority, they want to bring more businesses and residents to the municipality, then you can link the ways in which libraries support that through jobs and skill training information, through educational supports, those kinds of things. So there's ways to link back to your municipal goals and quality of life statements. I think the other thing you want to be able to do is position libraries within the current context. So you want to understand what's a priority for your municipality right now. Is there something that they're dealing with that's like a hot button issue that you can either link to, support, or at least be aware of when you're going into council? Because sometimes their heads are completely absorbed in whatever the issue of the day is. And I know this from experience. A few years ago, I was presenting to a municipal council, and they had just debated a really sort of contentious issue. So they're all, fired up. And then, we walk in and you're going, oh my gosh, what's going on here? So you want to make sure you understand the environment that you're presenting in and make any adjustments accordingly. I think it's just really good to know where they've been, what they've been talking about before you arrive on the scene, because it might need a bit of a reset. I think the other thing that libraries really need to do is to demonstrate their relevancy and impact. And so I think that, people assume that everyone knows what a library does, but they may have that perception from when they were in school or as a small child. They may not have been in a library recently. And so they don't understand the many, many ways that libraries are really integral to the community. And so that's a big thing that you want to make sure you're positioning your library for. The next line, when is a library not a library? When it's a community hub. And I think that what we're seeing is that certainly post-pandemic, people are looking for those safe, inviting spaces to go to, either with their families, with their partner, by themselves, where they can feel welcomed and they can, spend some quality time, looking at the materials that are available and that sort of thing. So I think that thinking about, positioning your library as a community hub is a really great way to help counselors think differently about your library. And then lastly, and I always cite this with a lot of groups that we've worked with. You have to compete with road maintenance. In all my years of municipal service, road maintenance tends to rank at the very top of people's priority list, either residents or councils or both. And so how do you compete with that? How do you compete with road maintenance? How do you compete with something that seems to be so all-consuming for your council and your residents? And I think the way to do that is to think about the soft services that make the community a home, as opposed to the hard services like infrastructure that make it reasonable for people to move around and do business and go to school and that kind of thing. if you were just in a barren infrastructure kind of environment, it wouldn't be very welcoming. It wouldn't be very comforting to be there. And so again, circling back to municipal goals, if one of the goals is to enhance investment in the local community, a lot of companies look for things like those soft services to add that quality of life for their employees if they're moving there. So they want libraries, they want swimming pools, they want rec centers, all those sort of soft things. So whilst the focus might be on things like road maintenance, you don't plow the roads enough in the winter, you don't spray the gravel roads for dust control, that kind of thing. Really, that's not what makes a community a home. And I think that there's a lot of work that libraries can really do quite easily to position themselves as, we are the things that make people comfortable in their environment. Preparation is really key. When you present to council, go in with a very strong purpose. Be really purposeful about what it is you are presenting and why. Make sure that you have a strong desired outcome. What do you want council to walk away with? Are you looking for approval for something? If you're presenting a report for information, what outcome do you want them to have? Is it to understand your library services better, to understand that perhaps maybe you've got a space crunch and you're going to be looking for a new location soon? What is it that you want your council to do as a result of your presentation? Awareness is not enough. It's not enough to just go in and say, we want to make you aware of all the wonderful things our library is doing. You have to give them a call to action, and you have to have in your own mind what that desired outcome might look like. So make sure that that's front and center, because when you come to do your key messages, it's going to factor huge in what you do differently in this presentation, maybe that you haven't done before. Know your audience. So this is a really key strategic move. You want to know who amongst the counselors are your fans, who are supporters of libraries, who's kind of on the fence, they haven't said one way or another, and then who are maybe opposed or think that libraries are unnecessary anymore. So understanding who each of the players is gives you a different way to prepare yourself to answer their questions. If someone's a huge fan, it's going to be easier to answer their questions as part of your presentation. If someone is, essentially expressing that we have the internet now, so we don't need libraries anymore, then I think you have a little bit more work to do in answering that person. It all comes down to your preparation, though. You should be prepared to answer the hardest questions. The easy ones are easy. Know your protocol. I've presented to large cities, small cities, counties, and each one is a bit different. Some are more formal than others. So if your council is more formal, make sure you understand how to respond to questions. Typically, they go through the mayor to, or Reeve, to a councillor. So in responding, we say, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Jones' question, or Madam Mayor to Councillor Smith's question. Here's how I answer that. So just know your protocol. It's important because you want to really come off, polished and prepared and, ready for this session. So it's just a good thing to keep in mind. Keep an eye on your time limit if you have one, and most councils these days do. You want to make sure that you're giving a reasonable presentation, but that you're not occupying the entire space allotted to you, so that there is that time for questions and clarification afterward. And also, I've never seen a council say, gee, you haven't used your full time, keep talking. Typically, they're happy to have the information. They want it concisely. They want it done in a very sort of logical format. But yeah, you don't need to go on if you've said what you need to say. And then it's always a good idea to have handouts or some document that's a leave behind for follow-up. This is another way for you to then express to your council whatever the desired outcome is. You need a 2% funding increase in order to meet inflation. You need as I say, you need them to start thinking about capital funding for a new building. Whatever your desired outcome is, you can frame your presentation, you can frame your key proof points, and then end with the call to action, and it gives them something tangible to walk away with. So if you're visiting your council in person, you probably have to submit those kinds of items with the report. And certainly online, that is the case as well. So make sure you've got that handout or leave behind that can give them more information. Practice. I like to memorize the opening of my presentations. I think that sometimes if you're nervous, it can be hard to get started. And so if you can memorize the opening of your presentation, then it just gets you in the flow, and then it usually goes a lot easier after that. So even if it's just the first line or two, it just gets you in the flow of speaking, and then you'll be able to wing it from there. Practice your presentation out loud. When you are presenting, and certainly if you have a bit of a script that you're trying to follow or bullet points, sometimes you get tripped up on the sentence structure of those bullet points, or you get hung up on pronunciation, which is my next point. If there's something that a word you don't like, or there's a word that you find difficult to fit in that particular sentence, make sure you rewrite it for yourself so that you can, express yourself easily and, in a straightforward manner. So you want to practice that out loud. There's nothing quite like saying the words out loud to really prepare you for a presentation. Watch your pace. Sometimes when we're nervous, we talk really fast and it goes like that, and people can't keep up with you. That said, some people take an agonizingly long time to get through, a simple sentence or two. So you don't want to drag it out too much, because then you start to lose your audience. You start to lose the people who are listening to you. And so this leads right into my next point, which is watch for cues. If people are looking bored, perhaps they start looking at their phone, or they look restless, you might want to speed it up a little bit. If, on the other hand, they're like deer in the headlights, hanging on to every word, you're probably talking too fast. Slow it down a little bit. Just watch for some body language. It's a really great way to make sure that you are keeping up with the flow of the group. Which is one of the reasons this presentation is a little tough for me, because I can't see you. So I don't know if you all are looking at your phones right now, or if you're actually listening. So hopefully you are, and hopefully I'm going at a good pace for you. When it comes to your presentation, make sure you have really clear, plain language, and those key messages, those 2 to 3 things you want your counselors to know about your library today. You don't need to give them the history of the library since it opened in 1962. You just need to give them the information that you need them to know today. Typically, key messages are 2 to 3 brief messages that you try and keep in the back of your mind. And even as you're answering questions, you want to be able to draw in those key messages. And politicians do this really well. I do a lot of media relations training. You've probably seen where a reporter will ask a politician a question, and then they'll say, that's a really great question, but what I really want you to know is blah, blah, blah. They don't even answer the question. They tell the reporter what they want the reporter, and by extension, the public, to know. So I'm not suggesting you go quite that far, but just remember that there's always an opportunity to slip in some key messages from time to time, where you can make sure that you're reinforcing your key points. I always say, if there's only 3 things you wanted me to know about your library, what would they be? And it needs to be today's context. As I say, don't tell me it opened in 1962 unless that's what would that be? Your 60th anniversary this year. And I see there was a question. Oh, no questions. Okay, we're good. Do pop questions in the question portion rather than raising your hand, because yeah, that was my mistake. No jargon or acronyms. So I've had the pleasure of working with the Yellowhead Library for several months now, and there are some things that librarians use as acronyms. And one of them I can think of is TAL, for example, the Alberta Library. So instead of saying TAL will do this, you need to say the Alberta Library, which is, and then explain what TAL is, and then go on. Like, you need to make sure your audience really understands what you're referring to. If you're talking about track, for example, you don't need to spell out what track stands for. You need to tell them kind of what it does, like, why is it important? So you can say our library uses track, and that helps us to do X. So that if you need to use the acronym, you can, but you're going to have to explain what that thing is, because they won't know what it is. And every industry has its jargon and its acronyms, but what we're going for here is clarity. We're going for a clear presentation that helps your council members understand what the library is doing and what it does for their residents, their constituents. We want to circle this back always to make sure that we're helping our councillors meet the needs of the people, and we can demonstrate that we're doing that. We're helping you meet the needs of the people. Make sure your presentation is in a logical sequence. I know that sounds funny, but sometimes when we're too close to the information, we shift things around because it makes sense in our head. So one of the things I like to do is just have somebody who's unfamiliar with the topic just go through the presentation and say, you were talking about this, and it wasn't until slide 5 that I went, oh, that's what that's about. So just make sure that you are presenting the information in a logical sequence to somebody who doesn't know what you do. You all know too much. You know too much about your library. You know too much about the system and how it works. So what you want to do is make sure you're presenting clearly to people who don't have your background. Don't read your slides. So as I'm reading my slides here, I say don't read your slides. What I mean by that is don't have long sentences on your slides. If you need a couple of words to prompt you to refer to what you're speaking about, that's fine. But when people put paragraphs up on a slide, that's really hard, because the immediate reaction of the audience is to stop listening to what you're saying, and they're reading ahead, and you don't want that. You want them to be paying attention. So a couple of words a person can scan quickly and then put their attention back to the speaker. When it's long paragraphs, it's just bad form. For most presentations, in fact, I don't use many words at all. It's usually all infographics or images. And then lastly, make sure your presentation ends with a call to action. Back to this notion about what is it you want from council? Why are you here today? What do you need from them? Make sure there's a strong call to action. I look forward to hearing, further from you about our request for additional funds, or, whatever it might be, an additional FTE. It'll end with a call to action, because that will be the last thing that they hear from you. And then it's likely to be the most memorable thing that they have to go on. What's happening here? There we go. Answering questions. This is always tough, because we spend a lot of time preparing for our presentation, but we don't think about what are people going to ask me. And so the best way to answer questions is to be prepared for them. So anticipate what counselors might ask you. Madam Library Director, you've asked for an extra FTE. Is this not a role that can be filled by a volunteer? If you think that's a question you're going to get, then write it down and then write out an answer to it, so that you've got that information at the ready. You want to be able to respond in a thoughtful way, but you also want to be able to respond so that you don't leave the council meeting and go, darn it, I should have said X, which oftentimes we do. Countering objections. If anybody's ever been in a high sales pressure store or car dealership, that kind of thing, you know that no matter what you say to the salesperson, they will come back to you with a reason why they can meet your needs. And it's called countering objections. It's a part of a sales process. So you need to be prepared for that yourself. So if you're in a furniture store and you're looking at a couch and a salesman comes up to you and says, oh, I'm sure that would be perfect for you. And you say, no, you know what? It's probably too big for my living room. That salesperson is not going to say, right, okay, well, have a nice day. That salesperson is going to say, why don't you buy 2 love seats and create yourself a nice little conversation nook? And you're going, conversation nook, that sounds fabulous. And before you know it, you're buying 2 love seats, even if you didn't want them. That's the kind of thing that you need. It's a kind of technique that you can be aware of so that you're prepared to counter the objections that you're faced by your counsel. So if your counsel says, Madam Library Director, we just gave you an FTE last year, and now you're asking for another one. We don't see how that's possible. You should be able to counter with things like, well, we've seen a 300% increase in the volume of requests for materials, and in order to da-da-da-da-da. Do you know what I'm saying? So you need to be able to counter that objection and not just let it sit there. Sometimes the difference between a question and an objection is that an objection isn't a question, it's a statement. And that's where you need to counter that statement. Don't just let it sit there, because if it does, it starts percolating in people's minds. So you want to be able to get to that and make sure that you're answering it in the best possible way so that you can make your case for what you need. Absolutely have your facts and figures at your fingertips, but they don't always tell a complete story. And I'm going to tell you a little story that I heard in 2002 that still resonates with me today. I was listening to someone speak about the AIDS epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa. It had wiped out an entire generation of men and women, so that there were grandmothers and there were grandchildren, but the parents had been wiped out by the AIDS epidemic back in the early 2000s. And this speaker had all sorts of facts and figures and charts and all that sort of thing. I can't remember a single fact. I couldn't tell you how many people had been affected by this crisis, but I do remember the story that he told. He said he was walking through a village one day and he came across a group of grandmothers, and they had grown some cabbages and they had a little cabbage stand like at a farmer's market. And this gentleman said, oh my goodness, you have a lot of cabbages there. It looks like you're going to do some good sales today. What do you do with the money that you make from your cabbages? And one of the grandmothers said, we buy coffins. There's never enough coffins. And that struck me and has sat with me for 20 years, because it's much more memorable than, 30,282 coffins are used each year, blah, blah, blah. Q4 stats say, blah, blah, blah. Like the figures, numbers and figures, while we want to rely on them because we feel it's empirical data, which it is, and it makes a good handout. When you're in front of council, though, you want to tell stories. Tell stories about how something that happened in your library really affected somebody. That teenager who came in, sort of wondering what to do for a career, and the librarian helped them find some resources to check out different career paths. And then that person came back and said, oh my gosh, you changed my life because I found what I want to do in life. Those kinds of stories are a lot more memorable than numbers. And particularly at budget time, when all counselors see our numbers, stories are the things that will set you apart. And I know that you're really great storytellers. So it's about just being prepared with 2 or 3 brief examples. The story can't be too long, because people sometimes lose patience and they don't listen to hear the punchline. But I think you can come up with 2 or 3 brief stories that really sort of accentuate your point. And now that I've told you the story about the grandmothers and the cabbages, I'm sure you will remember that as well for a long time. So that's really the point of it. I use that story to tell you to use stories. And I think that that's a really great technique. to really resonate with people far more than numbers will ever do. I know that YRL has sent out this presentation to many of you, and I know that they intend to send it out again today to anybody who has signed up for this webinar. So what this is a little presentation that I put together. You don't have to use the background, you don't have to use the graphics if you don't want to. I just threw it in there. It is not a YRL presentation. It's meant to be from your library or your library board. So you have to pop your own name in here and presentation to council, whatever words you would normally put on the cover slide. This is a handy little graph because this is just a representation of all the things that libraries do within a community. And it's something that was created by YRL to better explain the impact that libraries have. So you can see that, you know, this box up here is libraries have materials you can enjoy. They have skill and job training resources. They house local collections and host events. They facilitate social connections and access, both through not only just through access to materials, but you know, access to persons with disabilities or learning challenges. So there's access here. Writing, reading, and understanding. I mean, that's critical part, literacy, but we're using plain language here. So we did not use literacy, we used plain language. Oops, my mistake. Sorry. Health and wellness resources. You know, how do people live better, healthier? There's a whole wealth of information around that. Local workshops and programs, things that your kids can get involved in, things that families can do together. Together, these things make a difference in the community. They really do demonstrate how libraries are community hubs. And so you can use this slide or not. You don't even have to use this text if you don't want to, if there's some other way you want to profile your library instead. But this idea of demonstrating impact and how libraries make a difference is so far removed from this notion that, well, I can sign out a book, which might be the context that some people have about libraries if they've not been in a library recently. Instead, we're going to show counselors and frankly, anybody else who's listening, these are all the things that libraries actually do. And yes, signing out a book is one of them, is one way that it supports all of this, but together this makes a community. And I think this is a really strong, impactful way to just at a glance help counselors to understand the critical role that libraries play in communities. You might need to go over your year-to-date results. So a little bumper slide here, and then just a slide to remind you of the kinds of things you can put in an infographic. Library cards, are they trending up or down? Numbers of items borrowed, programs offered, that kind of thing. What you want to do with this, again, is not just think about the numbers, although it's going to be important to pop some numbers in. But again, let's go back to this examples and stories of impacts for people of all ages, how you connect with toddlers, children, youth, adults, seniors, whatever it is. So if the number of library cards are trending up, who's getting library cards? You know, tell me a little bit more about that. We're seeing a trend up in the number of young parents getting library cards so they can introduce their children to reading. Or we're seeing a trend of library cards going up among seniors who are looking for ways to connect in the community. So you need to tell the story behind the numbers as well. But nevertheless, statistics are always good. You know, your counselors want to know your performance metrics and what you're doing and how you are actually impacting the community. So you're going to need that, but be prepared with those stories behind the scene. Again, those things will be most memorable. Then talk about what you're planning for the coming year. If your municipality is on an annual budget, and this is the time of year that they are approving the 2023 operating and capital budgets, then you want to talk about how libraries are supporting the municipal priorities. So, you know, if they say they want to encourage, again, economic development, show how libraries are a real critical piece of that, and that, you know, libraries will help them achieve their goals. Always make it sort of about what's in it for them. you know, the old what's in it for me. Well, in this case, you want to make it all about your council and how you can help your council achieve their goals, because they don't think about those things inherently. They think, oh, we need more economic development. We should put ads in, you know, newspapers in BC and see if we can get people to move to our community. Sure, that's a plan. But, you know, I think there's a real role to be played here for libraries in demonstrating how you can enhance those kinds of goals and objectives. So you want to pop in your plan of service, and again, not word for word. Think about infographics, think about images that help convey what your plan of service is about. What is it you're going to do in 2023? And if you're asking for an increase in overall budget, is it because you're going to access more materials, or you're going to enhance your programming? And if you're enhancing your programming, then tell a story about why you need to do that. The last time we had a youth gaming night, we couldn't keep up with the demand, and it was a really great place, a safe space for teens to gather and play video games. So we want increased funding so we can put more of those nights on. Like, you need to tell the story about the increases and make it relevant for your audience. Again, have a slide about supporting municipal priorities. Even though you've talked about it all the way through your presentation, you're going to want to talk about specifically where you can outline how your library is supporting. Okay. Miranda asks if a plan of service is library lingo. Yeah, it is. It should be a strategic plan. If you're putting it on a, slide, you can put strategic plan if you want. I wrote plan of service so that most folks who are in the library world would know kind of what I was talking about. They do have a number of names: strategic plan, annual plan, work plan, whatever that is for you, for sure. Okay. Oops. There we go. So you can be really forthright with this. ABC Library supports municipal priorities, and then show links to the municipal strategic plan priorities, to the point where you can copy their graphics and put, if they've got a graphic showing something that is a municipal priority, put that in your presentation and then outline how the library is supporting those municipal priorities, or use some of the language. You have to be careful not to overpopulate the slide with too many words, but you can take 2 or 3 slides if you need to, put a slide for each municipal priority if you need to. So you've got a space to put in the slide their wording, and then how libraries help support each of those municipal priorities. Again, we talk about it through the presentation, but it bears repeating at the end, where we will bring it all together to talk about, this is how libraries are important to the community and to the municipality in achieving its goals and making a better quality of life for the people who live and work here. And then, if you can, get some testimonials. Residents agree that libraries are important, and then see if you can get either just, you know, patrons, ask them if they'd be willing to contribute a quote, or prominent people in the community. You don't have to identify them. You can just say, libraries are important, and then just put a dash library patron if they don't want to be identified. They can be anonymous, but I think this really kind of helps resonate for counselors that libraries are not about librarians and library staff. Libraries are about the people who live in the community. And so hearing directly from the community about how they value their library is going to be a really strong statement in your presentation to council. You probably have to outline your budget requirements. So here you're going to have to be a little bit more conforming to convention. So you're going to have to present your revenues and expenditures in the way that you normally would, of course. But again, make sure you know your numbers. make sure you understand if you've got a small increase, say for utilities, that you can quickly explain that the cost of natural gas has gone up and therefore this just reflects that hard cost increase that we have to bear. Like it's going to be really important to know your numbers and be able to respond to them really, really quickly. And then remember, when they're done asking you questions about your budget, close again with that strong ask. You can say things like, I believe we demonstrated today how libraries are integral to the community, how they support municipal priorities, and how they really make our community a wonderful, vibrant place for people to live, work, and play. And so we're looking for your support today with our request to increase budget by X amount or whatever. And then it just ends with a slide that says essential to your municipality's quality of life. It's just the last bumper slide. So I'm going to stop my share and see if there are any questions. I kind of went through that, I hope not too quickly, but I'm hopeful that you found something in there that resonated for you in terms of how you're going to prepare to present to your council this fall, presuming you will this fall or whenever you need to. So are there any questions that we can answer for you? Just go ahead and pop them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be happy to answer those for you. Any comments? Did I say anything that resonated for you, or is there anything I said that you feel doesn't fit for you and you want a different idea of how to approach that? Do you think you will use the sort of the slide deck that we've put together? And would that be helpful for you? Sure. When county and council make decisions without consulting you or the board, what do you do? Yeah, I mean, that's a reality, isn't it? I think that one of the things that you can do is immediately go to through the CAO, go to the CAO and say that, council has made this decision, and I just want to make sure that they understand the implications of the decision on the people that we all serve. Those kinds of things can sometimes help reframe, because several times, of course, you know that decisions are made and it's purely a numbers thing. And maybe they haven't really factored in all of the implications of those decisions. So I would definitely go back through your CAO. Obviously, you can't speak directly to the council, but I think that you can do that. And I would make a strong case for seeing if there's any way to reconsider that decision in light of new information. You can also ask for an opportunity to speak to council on it if it hasn't, been fully decided. Where can we get support for infographic development or use? Yeah, good point. You definitely want to use infographics. People like them. They really resonate with people. There's software programs like Canva out there that will help you create graphics. You can look to a communications or graphic design company to help you. Oftentimes it's not really that expensive to get an infographic done, but there are resources out there. You might want to start with something like Canva, just because it's relatively inexpensive. However, if you find that whole thing really frustrating and you're not sure about what to put in the infographic, that's probably where you need some advice from a communication professional who will help you, convey your message accordingly. Do you have any good ideas or training if you're really nervous about speaking? Yeah. So I think, first of all, I like to make sure that I have prepared myself. So I like to practice. And the more you say your speech, the more times you give your presentation, the more comfortable you are with the words. And then you don't have to be so nervous. I think that, as I say, for me, one of the tricks that works is I memorize the first couple of lines of my opening so that I know what I'm going to say and how I start in. You can also leave yourself, if you're on screen, if you're doing this by Zoom, you can make yourself a list of, sort of key bullet points that you tape to the side of your screen so they don't know you're reading and refer to that if that helps you. If you're in person, you can do the same thing, but just glance down from time to time. Don't sit and read it like this because that's a dead giveaway. But if you can just sort of discreetly glance, prompting you to speak more about a topic might help you as well. Practice is about the only thing that has ever worked for me. Just getting really familiar with the content, getting really comfortable with the flow, and just saying it out loud is what's really helped. Oh, a question about somebody who's grateful for the session because they've just been contacted by the CAO to make a presentation. Yay! Where will you find the recording? I think Jessica will let everybody know at the end of this where the recording will be posted so that you can go back and review if you wish. Do you think it's a good idea to have multiple speakers at these kinds of meetings? Yes. So you can do that, but be careful that you're not getting too gimmicky about the presentation. You don't want it to be, you say a slide and then I'll say a slide and then you say a slide and then I'll say a slide, because it feels contrived. Instead, I think that it's better to divide the duties based on the role of that person in relation to the library. So for example, your board chair is going to want to talk more about the bigger picture, the broader strokes around what libraries do, how they contribute within the community, some of those things that we talked about at the front end of the presentation. Library directors will probably be tasked with, going through the nuts and bolts of the budget, perhaps talking about the use statistics. See, there's a word you need to practice. The kinds of facts and figures, and your library director is probably more likely to have a story to tell or two about how the library has impacted somebody in the community. So I think start from a place that defines the role and sort of the scope of topic that each person has. And then once you've defined that, it's going to be really easy to divvy up the slides. And usually what I like to see is that the board chair would talk about some of those higher level things, immediately link into where the library is meeting the municipal goals in terms of service delivery to the public, those kinds of things, and then turn it over to the library director for some, the year in review, the stats, the budget, that kind of thing. When it comes to answering questions, you also want to make sure you're not tripping over each other. So again, go back to that scope. If someone is asking at a more broad level or a governance level, that's something your board chair should take on. If it's about, a line item in the budget, that's for your library director. So I think if you set those ground rules before you go in, it'll be a lot smoother. And practice together, like go through the presentation together, sit in a boardroom or on Zoom and practice the transitions. How do we move from one person to the next who's speaking in a seamless way that seems really prepared? Ultimately, what you want to do is you want to be confident going into council. You want to be able to go in and show council that you 100% can justify why libraries are an essential service in the community. No issue. You're 100% confident, and you're 100% confident in whatever recommendations you're putting in front of council because you've done the work. You've done the prep work, you've done the analysis, you've got the facts and figures. And oh, by the way, here's a story about a single mom who brought in her 2 kids after the pandemic, and they really connected with books, and now they're lifelong readers. Those kinds of things are really going to be important. So that would be my best advice when you have multiple speakers, is just really define roles and then also practice together. How many slides are appropriate for a 15-minute presentation? Yeah, so what I like to do is, believe it or not, take the amount of time that's allocated and divide it in half. So if you have 15 minutes, 8 slides. That gives you a couple of minutes per slide. You won't need as much on every slide. So some slides you might take 3 minutes, another slide is just 1 minute. But I think a good sort of mark is about taking half of the time you have, and then make that the number of slides you present. It causes you to be really tight with your presentation. And that's a good thing, because we don't want to go too deep into the weeds that we're losing people around logistics of how you get materials from YRL and all that purchasing and stuff like that. You don't want to go too deep in the weeds for this audience. You want to stay at a reasonable level such that you're presenting the information that they are looking for, but you're not getting into the detail, because you certainly don't want any red herrings. Oh, and speaking of red herrings, if something comes up and says, I saw somebody vandalized the outside of the library, when are you going to take the graffiti off the wall? Like, don't be sidetracked by those things. You just have to say, thank you very much. We've seen that as well, and we're getting, we'll get to it. Don't go into the detail about you hired some kids from the youth center and they're going to fix it or whatever. Don't get derailed by things that people may ask about that are not relevant to your presentation. Stay laser focused on the information that you want to convey. Make sure that you're sprinkling in those key messages whenever you can, and come back to them time and again, so that it really resonates with people. There's been some research done that says something like you have to say something 21 times before you can move somebody from apathy to action. So just know that while it sounds repetitive to you, the reason I said link to your municipal goals so many times today is because it's a really critical point and something that I wanted to leave you with. So I've repeated it so that it sticks with you. And that's just a fact. The other thing that we know from communication is that verbal communication has the least retention rate of anything. And so that's where the leave behind or the report or the handy little infographic booklet is going to be really critical, because even if they're paying close attention, and I'm sure they will be, to your presentation, like, you're going to leave and then the road maintenance guys are going to come in and it'll all be forgotten. So having a backup, a leave behind with contact information, call me anytime. I'm happy to, review these numbers with you again in person, make it friendly. Then you have a better chance of hitting the mark with your council. So I hope that's helpful. Any other questions? I don't think I'm seeing any at the moment. Yeah, it really is about being comfortable and confident with your presentation, feeling really solid about your facts and figures, your stories, your numbers, and really helping to paint a picture for counselors. And the other thing I would always recommend is that you have a really great answer to, why do we even need libraries anymore? We have the internet. My answer to that, if you're curious, is, yeah, we thought the same thing when Amazon came in and started selling books online, and we're still here. I think that libraries are more relevant today than they've been at other points in history, and it's because people are seeking out that social connection. Same thing, you can research other studies done from retailers, for example, who were worried that online sales during the pandemic would cause them, to lose foot traffic in stores. What we know is shopping is a social activity. You go with a friend, you go shopping together, you have lunch, that kind of thing. Similarly, libraries are a social connection. It's a way to get out in the community. I mean, it's going to be a pretty sad world if we never leave our houses again. Just because you can get everything online doesn't mean you should or want to. And so I think that it's that intangible social connection that people get from being out in the community, in a safe space like a library, in a place that helps them grow and develop as individuals or families, that is really, critical. And so, yes, we have the internet. We coexist. So, in my mind. Hello, Jessica. Oh, you're on mute. There you
I
go.
just wanted to pop in here and say on behalf of YRL, how grateful we are for your presentation today. I certainly pulled away a few nuggets as well, although, you know, part of my job right now is not presenting to council, but really, really great advice. For those of you with questions about the recording, we are going to send out the recording as well as all of the related documentation that you may or may not have received as part of the promo for this session. We are going to send it out again to this list of participants here today so that we know that you have that. And we'd also invite you to join us this time next week for part 2 of this. No, it's not this time next week. It's Friday at 1:30. For part 2 of this session, where Sue goes into some more advanced techniques for presenting to council. So once again, thank you, Sue. We really appreciate your time and your expertise here today. And for all of you who stayed with us during the session, and for those of you from outside of the YRL region that joined us, thank you. It was a pleasure hosting you today, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.